welcome to episode 12 of the Cedar Arrows Podcast. My name is Rebecca. I am a Bible-believing Christian, a wife, a homeschooling mom of 6, a homesteader, a knitter, a reader, a tea drinker, and lover of all things cozy and beautiful and homey. I am thrilled that you're here with me today, and I hope that you will find something here you enjoy. This podcast is primarily about knitting. You will hear me talk about those other things that I just mentioned. All of those aspects of my life are very intertwined, but really this is primarily a knitting podcast. So it's, lots of yarn and then a little bit of talk about the other things. You can find me elsewhere on the internet, on Instagram and Ravelry as HappyHomemaker05. So I don't have a lot to share, and I also don't have a whole lot of time today, so we will just jump right in and start with whips. So grab your knitting and let's chat. We'll say, before we get it started, that today is Saturday, and it is a rainy Saturday, so there are a bunch of children and dogs in this house, and I have asked them to be relatively quiet, keep it to a dull roar, but we will do the best we can. So for whips, well, I guess I will show you the one that I'm holding first. I'm in the middle of a row naturally, but it's just the tiniest beginning of a sock. I'm not even quite finished with the cuff, but this will be for my youngest son who loves green. He has loved green since he was old enough to know his colors. Except for a funny little phase that he went through around the age of 5 when he said his favorite was pink. Just because he wanted to be contrary, he still chose green for everything, but he insisted that his favorite was actually pink. So that was a funny little spell. But anyway, he loves all things green and usually has some sort of green socks. I try not to be too predictable about it, too boring about it, but he really can't get enough. So sometimes it'll be stripes or variegated, but always with green in it. And then this year I just am going with the solid green that I have here. So this is Knit Picks Stroll in the Aurora Heather colorway. It's just a little bit there. I'm not even sure what pattern I'm going to knit yet. I have been working on a patterned sock that has been taking more of my time. And yesterday I really needed something that I didn't have to pay attention to. I needed just something that I could just knit without looking. So I cast on a cuff. And that was perfect. And I knit almost the entire cuff in that spell of time that I needed something simple to work on. So I just have a couple of rows left for that, and then I'll get started on the sock. It's the body of the sock, but I haven't even decided. I'm not sure if this will be a vanilla sock or a patterned sock, but I also love green and cannot get enough of this color. I knit a baby gift in this same yarn last year, and my son and I both loved it, so I kept that in mind for this year for Christmas. So I'm keeping this in, I have shown you the before, good night. Keeping this in one of my Tom Bin pouches. I love these pouches. They are perfect for a sock project, perfect for sticking down inside a purse or a backpack or whatever. They are water resistant. They're a ripstop fabric, so they're pretty hard to destroy. I usually do keep a needle cozy on my needles so that the points don't get tangled up in the ball of yarn or poke through the bag. But there's not as much danger with this kind of bag. They're just the perfect size for an on-the-go project. So that's my first whip. Not very far along, but I'm really excited about knitting that color. I love knitting that. I love knitting socks. I love knitting green. I love that soft Stroll yarn, so it'll be a fun pair. My second whip, I'm a little further along. This is the one I've been working on much more lately. This is also Knit Picks Stroll. This is the Grizzly Heather colorway. This sock will be for my oldest son. Lighting isn't great. I think I mentioned it's raining today, so sorry if things don't show well. I keep sticking it up there hoping it will show. But anyway, this is the Dots and Lines pattern by Dana Rae Makes. She's on Instagram and Ravelry under that name. She is the sweetest. She is one of the first people that I got to know on social media several years ago, and we clicked and have just chatted and sent pictures back and forth, and I've just enjoyed following her on social media for several years now. She is just the sweetest, and she has designed so many beautiful patterns in these last few years. So she was knitting on a pair in this pattern recently and kept, showing her updated progress on Instagram, and I commented a couple of different times that I thought that was a really pretty pattern and asked her what the pattern was, and she told me it was one of hers. So I actually intended to buy it, but I got distracted and didn't finish my purchase. And then not long after that, I received the pattern bundle as a Ravelry gift from Dana. So that was really exciting. And then I just couldn't wait to cast this on. So this is part of her Textured Socks 3 Ways bundle. It's a fabulous value, by the way, because you get three different sock patterns for a very reasonable price. It's so nice. Such a fun texture. It's a very easy stitch pattern to memorize. Very simple repeat, and just makes such a fun, squishy, stretchy texture. So all my sons like a 10-inch leg for their socks. This, when I measured last night, I think was at 9 3/4. So I'm almost ready for the heel on this one. This is the first sock of the pair. So I'm hoping to get some good progress on the heel and foot today, and hopefully finish this pair up before too much longer, because I have several others to make. I joke, I've said this before, that we complain about how long the leg is, or how long the foot is, or how large somebody's foot is that we're knitting for. And on the one hand, I don't know why we do that, because I'm going to be knitting. If I'm not knitting this, I'll be knitting something else. But then also I have, 6 other pairs to knit in the next couple of months. So that's probably why. I'm always trying to finish the one thing and get started on the next. I have this project in this adorable bag. I love this bag so much. I found this on Etsy from a store that I was not familiar with previously, but when I saw this fabric, I just went looking for the size bag I wanted in this fabric, and I found a new shop. This shop is called Toodles My Darling, and again, I was not familiar. I knew nothing about this seller. Reviews looked good, but the bag was a reasonable price and it was the size I wanted, so I ordered it, and it is beautifully made. It has a lovely really cute gingham lining fabric, and y'all know I love my chickens. I love having fresh eggs. This just makes me smile every time I see it. I like that it's it's kind of monochromatic, but it also has the little splashes of red in the combs of the chickens. I just think that's really cute. So I have found her on Instagram. She's on Instagram and Etsy as Toodles My Darling. And I'm not sure, sorry, dog. I don't think that this was listed as a knitting bag. I don't remember what she called it in the listing, but I don't think it was specifically for knitting, but it works perfectly. So check her shop out for sure. So now let's talk about my next whip. This is my last whip for this week, but it is the one that is in timeout, so it will require more explanation. This pattern is called a twist on stripy socks. This is also by Dana Rae Makes. It is a beautiful pattern. It has this lovely lace and faux cable panel that goes up the whole length of the sock. It's on one side. The other side is just plain stockinette. It is just lovely. I really enjoyed this pattern. No complaints whatsoever about this sock. It's just a lovely sock. I bought this pattern the day it was released, or maybe the day after. I cast it on immediately. I had seen Dana's projects on Instagram and seen her test knitters projects, and I just loved this detail. It's so pretty. So I cast it on, got the first sock done pretty quickly, and then went to start the second one and just have hit several different silly little roadblocks that combined have made me just put it aside for a little while. I also don't have to have this pair finished until January, and I have several that I'm trying to get done in time for Christmas. So there is that. So it doesn't have to be a time crunch. So I'm not stressing about it. I'm just putting it aside for a little while. So anyway, like I said, a couple of different problems combined that just made me not feel like it right then. For one thing, this is a self-patterning yarn, a little bit different from a self-striping yarn that has consistent stripes of multiple colors. This is just alternating 2 colors, but it also is alternating the width of the stripes, and we've got like some thinner stripes, some thicker, some micro striping. So it makes for a really fun sock, but it's a little bit harder to find the end of the repeat. And that only matters if you're like me and you want your socks to match. So I have looked and looked on Ravelry, and I don't think I found any pair that matched exactly. And so I started even wondering if there was an actual repeat or if it was just random striping sequence through the whole skein. Did I say what this is? If I haven't said it yet, this is Knit Picks Static. It's a great yarn. I knit a pair of socks in this yarn for my son last summer, and there was a repeat to that skein, different colorway, but it was a very long repeat. So anyway, so I finished this sock and, took note of where I was at the end and where I wanted to be to begin the second sock. And that's usually not a big deal. You just, pull out the yarn until you get back to the color you want to start with. But because this is just alternating 2 colors, it's a little bit harder to find that place. So I got to what I thought was the beginning of the repeat, and I knit the cuff, and the cuff matched perfectly. Cuff matched just fine. And so then I kind of quit looking and comparing and just started really zooming on the leg. So I knit almost the entire leg. I'm on the last repeat of the leg before it's time for the heel. And I pulled the first sock back out of the bag and realized that it's not really exactly a match. It's not vastly different, and that's not a huge deal. So I kind of just put it down for a little while to determine, is this something that's going to bother me, that it's going to be slightly off for the whole rest of the sock, or is that okay? This particular daughter that these are for does like to have the matching socks, and this wasn't a ton of knitting, and so I thought, well, it's not that big of a deal to just pull it out and start over. But I didn't want to rip it out too rashly, which I have done before and then regretted. So I decided just to let it sit for a little while, and then I would decide. And then I realized that I also had put this lace panel in the wrong place on the sock. So that's not that big of a deal. You could just change the beginning of round and rearrange a little bit on the needles and then just keep going, and that wouldn't really matter. But the 2 things combined, I was like, yeah, I'm not really in the mood to keep finagling it to make it work. Does that make sense? So the thing about the panel is I'm left-handed. When I knit, my working needle is in my left hand. My working yarn is coming from the left, and I'm knitting from left to right. Most people are right-handed, and so they're knitting the opposite direction from what I'm knitting. So most pattern instructions are written for things to be knit right to left. and that's not how I knit. For some things, it doesn't really matter. I just kind of look at the pattern and determine if this is something that will matter. For some things, like if you have two decreases that are leaning toward each other, usually on each side of maybe a center column stitch on a shawl or something like that, my knit two together leans, I have to think about it now, whatever decrease you're doing to get to a left leaning stitch, I have to do the opposite because that will lean right for me. So like on a shawl that has a center spine, I just do the opposite. I switch the decreases and that works fine. Basically, the thing you're knitting first coming from the right, I need to knit first coming from the left. So it can get confusing. It often doesn't matter. And so it's just one of those things that I have to figure out. Is this going to matter? Is it not going to matter? If it does look a little different, how much does that matter? With cabling, for instance, if I do it exactly as the cable is written, then I will have the opposite twist or a mirror image of the cable that's in the design. Sometimes it's worth it to me it's easier just to do that and not care if it's, twisted the opposite direction. Usually I just know, I've been doing this enough years that I just know that if the cable pattern says that I need to hold the yarn to the front, that I actually need to hold it to the back. Anyway, so things like socks, when this really comes in, is if there is a set of instructions for a right sock, a set of instructions for a left sock, or mittens, or anything there's a left and right to, I just know that I need to knit the left sock instructions to get the right sock product, and then I need to knit the right sock instructions to get the left sock. So I did that mental gymnastics to start this sock, and then when I started the second sock, I actually forgot which one I had done originally, and I started doing the same one again. So so if I continued with this as it was exactly, the panel would also be traveling up the right side of the foot, and she would have two right socks, which, even that wouldn't be the end of the world. They're still pretty. She would still wear them. But, these are a Christmas birthday gift, and I want them to be just right. So I could have just let the color repeat go and not worried about them being matching exactly. I've done that once or twice. Nobody else even really notices as much as I do. But when I realized that my panel was also in the wrong place, I thought, I'm just going to rip the whole thing out and start over. Again, it's not a ton of knitting. This represents a few hours because I'm not a terribly fast knitter, but it wasn't wasted time because I'm such a process knitter. I'm going to be sitting and knitting something. So with things like this, I just have to decide, is it going to make me feel more annoyed, more ill, more not in the mood to do it if I let it continue as is, or if I rip it out and try again? And most of the time, because I am such a process knitter, I would rather rip it out and do it again. There are some exceptions to that, and like I was mentioning with my son's socks, sometimes the time factor is the biggest deal. But again, this isn't a ton of knitting, and I don't have to have this done till January. So I decided, with the combination of problems, I didn't want to just keep going as it was. So I pulled this off the needles, and then this turned into a mess. I used the leg of my sock blocker, and I just wrapped the yarn around the leg so that I could have a better kind of zoomed out view of the repeat, of more stripes than just like pulling out and looking as it's coming out of the skein. So, you see sometimes self-striping dyers will have, instead of a knitted sample, they'll have like a piece of cardboard or something. I don't know what they use, but just have the yarn wrapped around so you can see the sequence of the stripes, but it's just clearly wrapped around something. It's not actually knitted up. So that's what I was going for with this. I just wrapped it around the leg of my sock blocker because that was pretty close to the size the circumference I need for the sock so it would mimic the striping width. And I did that for the whole length of the sock blocker and could better pick out where in the repeat I needed to cut the yarn and start again. So we'll see if I did it right the second time. Actually, I think this might be the third time. I think I started the cuff and didn't get very far before I realized I was in the wrong place. I'm not really sure. This might be the third attempt coming up. And it might be the last, because I might be getting to that point where it's worse to rip it out and try again than just to keep knitting. But I'll be really excited if I can actually make them match. So I did all that. I wound off the yarn, cut the yarn, and then I haven't actually cast on yet. So I rewound my ball because you can imagine the mess it had become. So I still have plenty left after winding off that chunk, and I'm hopeful. We'll see. It still might not be the right place, but it's not this, so it's a different place, even if it's not the exact right place. We'll see. And I am glad not to have a lot of time crunch pressure with that one. I've already, her Christmas socks are the only Christmas socks I have finished so far. So these are definitely, can just be for her birthday, which is after Christmas, and so it'll be fine. So this is going back into its little bag for another day. So those are my whips. I do still have a secret whip that I'm not ready to share yet, and that has actually been getting a lot of my knitting time. So I feel like I have a lot less to show than I should right now, but when I'm ready, you'll see what I'm working on, and I'm excited about it. So I only have 2 finished objects, so we'll go ahead and start with this pair of socks. I have shown you these once or twice before, but they are now fully finished. These will be for my youngest son for his birthday, which is next month. This yarn is Knit Picks Felicini in the Sunday Game Day colorway. And I knit the, what was that? It's Mustard Seed Socks by, where is his name? Kieron Pegg. So it's just a very simple knit purl texture. And if I remember correctly, yeah, it's a texture row and then a rest row all the way through. So that's really nice. It was very straightforward, very simple. The slip stitch, heel flap, and gusset. I knit 64 stitches for most of my family. My husband and one daughter have narrower feet, so they have a 60 stitch sock. But 64 stitches, 10-inch leg. I don't remember how many inches that foot is, but it's almost the same size as mine. He will outgrow me very soon. I think I mentioned before, this was my first time using the Knit Picks Felicini. I always enjoyed the Felici, and they stopped making that, although I've heard a rumor that maybe they're bringing that back. I'm not sure. I liked it pretty well. No complaints. It's very similar to the Felici. The Felici base had changed some over the years. It had been really, really soft, and then it became a little more toothy, and I actually like the toothier yarn better. I think it's sturdier, especially for the boys. This is kind of in between those, so yeah, I liked it. I think it will wear well. I think he will like it. These colors are very him. So I've already talked about these. I don't think there's really anything else specific to share, but I'm very happy with how they turned out. So I was feeling very accomplished because I was getting a larger pile. You know, I was watching my sock pile grow as I knit socks through summer sock camp and was getting ready for Christmas socks. But most of the kit, like this is what we call birthday season this time of year. And most of the socks I have knit have been going for birthday gifts instead of Christmas. So though I have been knitting socks since June, I mean, they haven't been the only thing I've been knitting, but I've been focusing on them a little more since June, and I only have one actual Christmas pair finished. So so these will be birthday socks, and he's the same one that the little green cuff is for, so those will be for his Christmas. So it's going to be all kids socks all the time until December rolls around, I'm thinking. My last project is this adorable little finished Knubbelchen. I never really know how to say that, but anyway, cute little baby doll. I love this pattern. This is the third one that I've made, and I've shown them all on the podcast. It's a very sweet, very simple pattern. The head is stuffed, but the rest of the body is not, so it doesn't require much besides just your needles and yarn. I knit this using Alaska Venture Co, aka Venture Co on Instagram, Clover, and the face is just using some leftover yarn from a shawl from several years ago. It was dyed by October Fiber House, I believe. But it's just the sweetest pattern. It's a free pattern. You should definitely check it out. Every baby needs one. This is for a friend who had a baby this summer. They live very far away from me, and I never really get to see them. So I will be sticking this in the mail, but I decided since I hadn't mailed it yet, I might as well hang on to it to show on the podcast. I think I've mentioned this before, but I heard this on a different podcast, and I've really appreciated this tip. So you knit the legs and the arms, you decrease at a certain rate, and then you follow the pattern to knit a certain number of rows, but then you tie these little knots in the arms and legs and in the hat as well. So I have learned that it is easier to tie the knots if you add a few more rows. So I think I've added 7 to the legs and maybe 5 to the arms. I think that's what I did this time. And then 5 to the hat. It just gives you a little bit more length when you go to tie the knot, and it makes it a little bit easier. It's so cute. It's a very quick, simple pattern. One of my 15-year-olds knit her first doll recently, and her gauge is much larger, looser than mine. I mean, I knit my socks and this on size 2. I don't know anybody else who knits socks on size 2 needles. I just have a very, very, very small gauge. So I'm always having to move up a needle size or 2 or 3 to get gauge. Her gauge is I think a little more normal, really, but she was very annoyed because her doll turned out bigger than mine, and she felt like this was a better size. So I guess I need to get her some smaller needles. So that is, I guess, all the knitting for this time. Let me see. So as far as future knitting goes, like I mentioned, it's going to be lots of socks in my future. The girls' socks are very, very quick because they all like shorties. So I'm not working on those yet. I'm focusing on the boys' socks. I have, I didn't get it out, but I have another couple of skeins of Knit Picks Stroll for my other son. His socks will be red this year. That's his favorite color. I'm not a big fan of red, so it's not the thing that I'm usually drawn toward to knit, but he really does love it. And I found a pretty colorway that wasn't offensive to to me, but that he will love. So it was a nice compromise. As far as life things are just always crazy around here right now. We have another child that recently got a driver's permit. So we have 2 that are licensed and 2 that are learning. So that's kind of overwhelming. Our 11-year-old dog has been having some health issues. She had surgery a few weeks ago, and then while recovering from surgery, apparently was bitten by a snake. So we've been at the vet a lot lately. But she is recovering very well from the snake bite. She's not quite healed, but she's almost there. And I feel like to be 11 years old and 12 pounds and recover from a snake bite is pretty impressive. So we're having to keep that wound clean, and she's receiving a lot of extra attention and time lately, but she's doing very well. So I'm very glad about that. Let me see. We are gearing up for our family homeschool retreat, family camp that we do every fall. We'll be doing that in a few weeks. So we're in the very busy preparation stage right now. So that's always wonderful, always a little bit overwhelming to get there, but once we are there, it's always so good, such a blessing. And we see a lot of our dearest friends and favorite people there. So we're excited for that. So because of that, I might not record in 2 weeks. I often say I'm going to try to record in 2 weeks and then fail to do so. So we will see how it goes. But things are very busy. So if you don't hear from me in 2 weeks, probably about 4 is what I will shoot for. And we'll just do the best we can. That's all I can do anyway. Oh, I did want to share one other thing. I usually try to share something toward the end, just something good, something that's making me happy lately. And I wanted to share this book that I have and this ridiculous, funny story about this book. This is called Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House in the Ozarks. If you've been around very long, you know I'm a fan of Laura Ingalls Wilder. I love her Little House books. I grew up on those books. I remember my mom reading them to us, sitting on our couch when I was a little girl. And they were some of the first books that I read to my children. When my first son was not quite 2 and could not get enough reading. And we would sit and read for hours. And I finally got tired of reading the same picture books over and over. And so before he even turned 2, we started reading the Little House series. And I'm not sure how many times we've read them together. So anyway, I loved them as a child. We had all of them. We went to Mansfield a couple of times. It was not far from my grandparents' house, Mansfield, Missouri. So we went there and got to tour Laura and Almanzo's house. And I loved everything about Laura. So when I was probably 7 or 8, maybe a little bit older, I saw this book on my parents' shelf. And I was so excited to find something else about Laura that I hadn't read yet. And I opened it up and I thought it was so dry. It was nothing like what I had envisioned. And I don't think I made it through a page. I was like, no, thank you. And I put it back on the shelf and I was very disappointed. So roughly 30 years later, just a couple of weeks ago, I was going down a rabbit hole like you do, Googled one thing, which led to another. And I saw a book mentioned on a blog post as a thing that if you're interested in homesteading, and especially some of the chicken keeping was part of what caught my eye, that this was a book to read. And the reason that it was the book to read is that it is a compilation of Laura's magazine and newspaper columns. She wrote advice columns and just things about homesteading and homekeeping for years, and was a regular in one, I think it was called The Ruralist, one newspaper for years after she moved to Missouri with her husband and her daughter. And so this book is a compilation of that homesteading advice and just, the simple homespun wisdom, as they say. And I thought, well, that book looks familiar. I think that's the book my parents had. So I picked up my phone to text my mom and ask her if she still had this book and if I could borrow it, because now, 30 years later, I'm interested in reading it. And then I thought, wait a minute, I have a bunch of books about Laura on my shelf. Maybe I should see if I have that book. I have that book. I've had this book for years. Somebody gave it to me several years ago. And at the time, I was like, oh, well, that looks interesting. I should read that. And I stuck it on my shelf and moved on with my life and never read it. And now 30 years after the time that I picked it up and was very disappointed, 37-year-old me cannot wait to get into this book. it's not her stories that would interest a small child. It makes sense to me that I wasn't really interested then, but I had no idea then that I would someday be a homesteading, homemaking mom and want to read about chickens and gardening and all the things. So I haven't read this yet, but I'm very excited to read it. So that's my something good for this time. If you have read it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I hope you weren't disappointed like I was at first. I think I'll like it much more the second time around. So silly. Well, I guess that is all for now. I am sure I will think of other things I wanted to share with you because that's how my brain works. But I will go for now, and I will hope to hear from you. And I would love to connect with you and talk with you in between times. And hopefully I'll be back here to talk with you in maybe 2 weeks, very likely 4. I'll be here when I can. Until then, I hope you have a great day, and I hope you enjoy your knitting. Bye.